I walk my dog Hemi twice a day and let him out in the yard once as well. When we go for walks around the neighborhood, I always try to mix up the routes so it does not get boring, not just for me, but for Hemi too. On weekends, I usually take him on longer walks since I have more free time and I am not carrying around stress from work in my head. One cloudy and humid Saturday evening, I decided to take him on a long walk, close to an hour. We ended up in a section of the neighborhood that I was not very familiar with. I came across a walking trail that connected to the town's large nature preserve. It was a quiet, low-traffic path, and it did not look like anyone else was using it at the time. The trail was narrow, with woods on both sides. It was not paved like the bike paths elsewhere in the preserve. Hemi was pulling harder than usual, clearly excited by all the unfamiliar smells along the trail. Eventually, we passed a small square park. It had a swing set, a small playground, and what used to be a basketball court, though the hoops were gone. I decided to walk in through the opening, because Hemi was suddenly going wild over something. I planned to sit on one of the benches facing the playground to rest for a minute, since I was starting to feel tired. But as soon as I sat down, Hemi kept pulling and began barking at something. He usually only does that when he sees another animal or sometimes a person. I decided to see what had him worked up and stood up, giving him more leash. I looked into the woods, but did not see anything at first. The closer we got, the more aggressive he became, pulling so hard that he was nearly choking himself on his collar. And a man suddenly stepped out from behind a large tree. He was laughing and said something like, "Whoa," he caught me. I told Hemi to calm down and pulled him away from both the man and the woods. I apologized and started walking away, since the way the man appeared from behind the tree felt strange. He said it was all good and started walking in the same direction as us. Hemi kept turning around and barking. I kept pulling Hemi forward. After a bit, I turned around and asked if he needed something, since he was following us out of the park and back onto the trail. He raised his hands, smiled, and said he just wanted to pet my dog. I told him no and said Hemi did not like him and that we were going to keep walking. He did not respond. I turned away and picked up the pace. Hemi kept growling and looking back. Every time I glanced behind us, the man was still there, keeping the same distance, partly off the trail and half hidden behind trees, like he thought I could not see him. I almost yelled at him to leave us alone, but then it hit me that he might actually be dangerous. I started running down the trail until I reached the opening where we had entered and got back onto the street. Once we were back in the neighborhood, we ran the rest of the way home. I exercised regularly, so I was not worried about him catching up. Hemi eventually stopped looking back. A few hours later, Hemi was lying in his bed next to mine when he suddenly lifted his head toward the window and growled. At first, I assumed it was the sound of rain starting to hit the window. I thought about getting up to close it, even though I was already comfortable in bed. Then I heard a voice speaking through the open window. It was the same voice from earlier, asking if I knew why he was in the woods. Hemi completely lost it. I jolted upright and looked toward the window. I could not see his face, but I could make out the shape of his body standing there. I yelled, asking what he wanted. He calmly asked if I saw what he was doing in the woods. I told him no. He asked if I was sure. I said yes, my voice shaking. He said okay, and I saw his outline move away from the window. After a moment, Hemi stopped growling. I closed the window and locked it. There was no way I could sleep without calling the police. I told the dispatcher that someone followed me in the park and then came to my window. She asked if the man had left, and I said as far as I knew, yes. She told me to call back if he returned and mentioned that it was a busy Saturday night. Knowing Hemi would alert me if anything happened helped me calm down a little. The man never came back, thankfully. But his question, asking if I saw what he was doing in the park, still does not make sense to me. I cannot help but wonder if he was doing something he did not want anyone to witness. And that thought only makes the whole situation even more unsettling. It was an ordinary night during the summer of 2010. I had taken my dog Poppy out for his usual late-night walk. I normally followed the same route every time, though once in a while I would wander down a different street. That night, I chose to turn onto a block I did not know very well. The only thing I really knew about that street was the abandoned house on the corner. People in town called it the murder house. I had only ever seen it while driving past. The first time I noticed it, I slowed down just to look at it because it was such an eyesore. It stood out badly compared to the other homes nearby. I never understood why the town did not just tear it down and build something new, especially considering its history. No one ever bought the place because a young woman was murdered inside, possibly by her boyfriend. He was never seen again. There was no body, no trail, and no evidence of where he went. As I walked down the block, the house came closer and closer. I already planned on stopping to look at it, but Poppy stopped before I did. He just stared at the house. I could tell by his ears and the way he tilted his head that something had his attention. I looked around at the neighboring houses, which were spaced fairly far apart. Our neighborhood has a lot of greenery, with bushes and trees lining the streets. It was also extremely dark, and the house happened to sit right between two streetlights. It did not seem like anyone nearby could see me, so I stepped onto the grass of the property. Poppy stayed where he was. He started growling and making soft whining noises, almost like he was uneasy or annoyed. I tugged on the leash, and after a moment he followed me onto the lawn. His attention was fixed on an open window. I stepped onto the long wooden front deck and walked closer to it. Poppy continued growling and whining. I leaned in and pressed my face against the screen, surprised the window was even open. I wondered if someone was still keeping up with the place in some way, though I did not know what that would involve. The inside was dark, but not completely black. I could see the walls of an empty living room, and beyond that an opening leading to a back room with another window. While I was looking, I heard a sound from inside, like something heavy hitting the floor. It came from deeper in the house, possibly the back room. Having Poppy with me gave me a strange sense of confidence, so I went around toward the backyard. The yard was enormous. The grass was tall and overgrown, which made it clear no one was maintaining the property. The only thing back there was an old, decaying wooden shed in the corner. Its door was slightly open. I was curious, so I approached and looked through the opening. At first, all I saw was a dark, empty space, maybe what used to be a mudroom. Poppy stared at the shed. He was not barking or growling. He was completely silent. I slowly walked toward it, gently pulling him along and trying to keep both of us quiet. The door was open just enough for me to see inside. It was not empty. There were no tools, no bikes, nothing like that. There was only a thin young girl standing in the center of the shed. I say girl, but I could not tell if she was a teenager or a grown woman. Suddenly, Poppy lost it. He barked and made sounds I can only describe as a dog screaming in fear. He was not pulling toward the shed. He was pulling away from it. The girl inside turned her head toward the doorway, and I ran. We ran. Poppy and I sprinted for 3 full blocks until I could not breathe anymore. After that, we walked the rest of the way home. I had gone on to the property of a house known for the murder of a young woman, and then I saw another young woman standing inside an otherwise empty shed. I still do not know whether what I saw was something paranormal or just a person exploring that abandoned place the same way I was. I was 10 years old when my parents finally let my brothers and me get our first dog. I was the middle child, and walking the dog was always split between my older brother and me. Our dog's name was Nyla. Nyla was a golden retriever. My brother usually walked her in the afternoon after school, and I handled the nighttime walks. I honestly do not remember what kind of night it was. I cannot recall if it was cold or warm, a weekday or a weekend. The only details I remember are the ones tied directly to what happened. I was about halfway through our walk when Nyla suddenly looked across the street and started wagging her tail. She began barking and pulling on the leash, excited to greet another dog being walked by a man on the opposite side of the road. The man decided for both of us to cross the street so the dogs could meet. His dog was tiny and fluffy. I think it was a Maltese. The little dog seemed nervous and uninterested in Nyla. The man asked my name, and I told him. He told me his name as well. I do not remember what it was, but we ended up talking for a while about our dogs. He seemed to really like Nyla, and Nyla seemed comfortable around him. He told me that his golden retriever had recently died and that he had a bunch of dog toys and supplies he would be happy to give me. I thought it sounded like a lucky break. He said his house was just around the block and started walking, with me following beside him. We walked in the street most of the way back, but the neighborhood roads were usually quiet. When we reached his house, he let me go in first. The house looked fine, simple, and average. He led Nyla and me into the kitchen and let his small dog wander off into another room. He asked me to sit on one of the stools at the kitchen island and offered me something to eat. He handed me a bag of chips, and I accepted. They were some off-brand potato chips. He sat on the stool next to me and began petting Nyla. He was sitting very close, and I noticed him glance at the chip bag, almost like he was waiting for me to open it. I set the bag on the counter. He continued petting Nyla quietly. I kept wondering when he was going to bring out the dog supplies he mentioned. He did not seem to be in any hurry. Instead, he started asking me personal questions and making uncomfortable small talk. At one point, he even patted my knee in a way that felt wrong. A strong feeling of discomfort hit me, so I asked about the collar, toys, and supplies again. He said he would be right back to get it. Just it, not them. That stuck with me. He left through one of the kitchen doorways and went downstairs to the basement. A moment later, he called up to me and told me to come down and look at the things he wanted to give me. I stood up and walked toward the basement door, still unsure if I should go down. Then Nyla began growling at something behind the open basement doorway. I looked closer. There was someone crouched in the dark hallway. I did not stop to think. I left the house immediately. I went straight home and did not tell my family anything. I stayed in my room the rest of the night, shaken and silent. It was the first and only time I ever felt targeted because of my age. The only explanation I have is that there were two men in that house, and if I went into the basement, the other one would have closed the door behind me. I never told my family because it made me uncomfortable and honestly embarrassed. Sharing it anonymously online feels completely different. It really is completely different.